I used to be this type of person that really wanted to be the CEO guy in the business world. And then, if I ever went into entertainment, I thought I'd be the type of person that wants to be, the greatest comedian that, like Eddie Murphy, right?
That is Umbrex member Anish Shah, a McKinsey alum and professional comedian who does corporate gigs around the world. In this episode, Anish shares the story of how he built his comedy career and explains to me he had to answer a question that had never occurred to me. He had to decide, did he want to be famous or did he want to make money? We'll also hear a clip from one of his performances on this episode, and you can check out more videos on his website at anishcomedy.com, where you can also sign up on his mailing list to get notified of upcoming shows or reach out to him about booking Anish for your next corporate or charity event. Hey, Anish, it is great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Will. I appreciate you having me on.
So, Anish, you were 19 and you started Discount Savings Group, grew to a company of 30 employees. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it was, I think, something that wasn't really expected. The way it started was during my freshman year, second semester, I was in one of the bookstores, Follett's bookstore at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I overheard the manager, talking to her employees saying, don't forget today after the store closes, the band is going to come in. There's about 300 of them and they get 5% off on all textbooks and 25% off of everything else in the store. And I'm sure textbooks cost way more now, but back then they were still pretty expensive. It was like $300 a semester for textbooks. So 5% was $15 a semester on textbooks. And so when you're a college kid and you're like scrounging literally for quarters to pay for Taco Bell, that $15 per semester is useful. And so, I thought to myself, I could probably get a group of 300 people together and maybe I can get this bookstore to give me 15% or 5% off for all of those 300 people and maybe give me a small percentage as well. And so I went to the Follett's the next day, sort of thought about it and said, hey, if I can get 300 people, will you give them 5% off, 20%, 25% off of everything else and give me a 3% percentage of everything that's sold, which on $300 of textbooks would be an extra $9. And they said, sure. And so then I actually didn't end up doing it with Follett's. I did it with another bookstore called TIS Bookstore because I liked them a little bit better and they gave me the same deal. And then I had to figure out how to go out and get 300 people. So I messaged like the top 50 student organization presidents on campus and just said, hey, we wanted to give you a free membership into this name that I made up, Discount Savers Group, for one semester, and you'll get 5% off on all your textbooks if you send people over to pick up a card. And then I didn't know how many people would show up. I promised the bookstore 300, and they said bring as many as you can, and 1,200 people showed up in the first 5 days. And so, we collected the percentage of revenue on all those people. At the same time, because we're only doing a free semester, I would sell them the next semester. Basically say, look, you can get 3 months now, or you can get the full year of discounts for an extra $5. And so 98% of people would pay the $5 so they could get the same savings next year or next semester.
So wait a minute. They're going to go to the store. You're going to get 3% on what they buy, and they pay you $5 for that privilege.
Yeah, and $5 is only the first semester when we set it up. After that, we were like, every 98% is way too high of a conversion rate. Let's take it to $10, right? And we were still getting 93% conversions. And so, then it was like, okay, this is making a ton of money. We had thousands and thousands of customers at our campus. And so started expanding to other campuses, started working with some national retailers, and it just kind of became this really crazy endeavor for a 19-year-old college kid that, was super fun. And you learn all the sort of pros and cons of starting a business very, very quickly. For example, one of the cons or one of the mistakes, I guess, that I made was switching from Follett's to TIS, because when I wanted to expand, these bookstores were giving me real estate in their store for people to come and pick up their cards because it would spur the immediate sale of the books. Right. So when I wanted to expand, the natural path was to expand to other TIS stores, of which there were 5 compared to Follett's, who had 800.
Oh,
right.
Nice decision there. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. So, lots of interesting lessons learned, lots of, fun experiences, and built a really cool business in a college town, right, where beer costs I think we had 25-cent pitchers when I was in school. And so I was kind of like the little rich Indian kid on campus, which was fun.
And how long did you ride this wave, and did you end up selling this thing, or what happened to it?
Yeah, so I did it for 3 years, and a couple of things. One is I learned that barriers to entry really matter, right? So I started this on campus, and I remember the Daily Illini, our school newspaper, came and interviewed me about it because it became kind of this big sensation. When I started, people, there's like lines going out the door at TIS to get their card. And so they wrote an article, a bunch of other people sort of inquired about it. And within 1 year, 6 different competitors had opened up, one of them run by the Daily Illini, right? They created their own discount card, right?
The business manager's reads the paper. This is a pretty good idea. Let's do this.
Yeah, exactly. They wrote an article about it and then stole it, right? My best friend started one, right? It ended our friendship. It was craziness because there was nothing, all that could stop you was technically I had an exclusive contract with all of these retailers that were local, but I had no budget to defend those contracts, right? And so, they would just go out and get similar deals. And so that was one thing that happened. And then the other thing that happened was it's a very cyclical business, right? So the reason we had 30 people is because we'd hire a bunch of part-time staff to help sell cards at the beginning of each semester, but everybody's starting roughly the same time. And so I can't really be on every campus all the time. And I'm missing months of school at the beginning of each semester. And so, which is, in business school applications, I argue that that's why I had such a terrible undergrad GPA. But so this replicability of it was not great, right? So that first campus, we were getting 93, 98% conversions on that upsell when you came in for your free card. Other campuses, we would do worse, right? Depending on how good the campus manager was, it might be 50% or something like that. And so I ran into a bunch of problems. And so we decided, just sell some of the contracts that were more valuable, some of the cooler things that we'd set up to, some of the competitors. And then, I had at that point gotten a job as a marketing guy for a hot new internet company that I thought was going to become huge. And it did not. But, it kind of was this sell the contracts and then get out of the business, basically.
Cool. Let's talk about stand-up comedy. So you're at McKinsey, and you said, I just like most people that leave the firm, you decided to go into stand-up comedy. It's a standard path, business school, McKinsey, stand-up comedy. What? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I was always the kid when I was younger that liked being on stage. So I was often the lead in the school plays in high school, and when I was in college, they would have these big South Asian cultural shows, in this 1,600 person auditorium, and I was the kid who would MC that stuff. And so I always liked being on stage. The MCing was really doing stand-up comedy, although I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I was just MCing the show. And then even when I went to business school in McKinsey, I was always just kind of poking a little fun at the whole thing. You were at McKinsey, right? I think we were there around the same time. I was 04 to 09.
Yeah, we overlapped.
Yeah. So if you remember at McKinsey, they have the Know portal, which is our internal knowledge portal for your listeners. And there was this declared expertise section. Do you remember that?
I do.
Right. So nobody ever filled out the declared expertise because it felt very egotistical, right? And no one read it. And so I did silly things at McKinsey. I filled out that declared expertise, and it was, the expertises were giving clients a non-answer answer. Right. And, you know, the non-answer, by the way, was like, it came from a private equity project that I did, where I was in the elevator on the second day of the project. I was like an associate, right? It was the first private equity gig I ever did. And someone got on, he's like, "Oh, you're one of those McKinsey guys, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "What do you think about the deal?" And it was like day two. I'm like a new associate. I know nothing. And I gave him a non-answer, which was, you know, I like the business. I don't know if I like it at this price, which is nothing, right? And it's like literally gives him no information. And he's like, he looks at me and he goes, "I like where your head's at, kid." And he like gave me this thumbs up and left. And I was like, "Great, non-answer." So it was stuff like that I wrote, and it went like pretty viral within the firm. Like these consultants from South Africa came in to Chicago, and they knew I worked in Chicago, and they like wanted to go out for drinks. I think I've been told that it still hangs in the office in Milan, and like the consultants that work there don't know it's like a real person. They thought someone just made it as a joke. So yeah, I would just do stuff like that. And then, you know,
any other areas of expertise that you had beyond the no answer?
Yeah, it was how to get ready on a Monday morning in under 30 minutes. And it had like, you know, lessons like, you know, brush your teeth in the shower and stuff like that. And then there was how to let your expenses pile up until they've reached something like $26,000 and your wife is threatening to divorce you. And just, you know, I don't remember all of them, but it was stuff like, it was like, you know, knowing exactly what type of clothes to wear to the airport so that you can get to security as fast as possible. So slip-on shoes only, no laces, that sort of stuff. You know, belts that don't set off the alarm. So it was actually somewhat useful stuff, but you know, it was fun.
Some of the important skills that weren't captured in the engagement performance review.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Okay, so you're doing that, and then back to the story. So keep going. So what was the path?
Yeah, so I was there for something like 5 years, and then I got an opportunity to work for a company called SPSS, which is a lot of people know it for their statistics package, but they have this new like kind of cutting edge predictive analytics technology, and so they had a plan, which was they were in the process of buying a company called Confirm It, which was like a $50 million market research company. And so they said, "Look, you've never worked in technology before, so why don't you come be our head of strategy, learn the business, work on, you know, sales and marketing issues while we finalize this deal. And then once the deal's finalized, that'll be kind of your company to like, you know, work with and you know, help make successful through the acquisition," which was cool. It was sort of like getting a $50 million P&L coming out as an engagement manager from McKinsey. And so I was like, yeah, I'll take that. And then I went in and I worked on the sales and marketing stuff. And before we could close the Confirm It deal, IBM swooped in and bought us for like 40% above our share price. And the first thing they did was kill all the deals that we had going on. And so I left to join this small, almost startup-y type of environment to like have like, you know, kind of a fun business to be pretty actively involved in. And now I was employee number 7D5560 at IBM, something like 17 levels removed from the CEO. I counted once. And if I'd gone straight to IBM, it would have been from McKinsey, I would have come in at a completely different level, right?
I just want to pause to say that I think there's fewer than 17 levels between a seaman recruit and the commander-in-chief of the United States. So that's pretty impressive vertical steps at IBM.
Yeah, and you're just this like sad McKinsey boy, like 17 levels down, like screaming up into the ether, like, "No, you don't understand. If I'd come another way, I'd be on this, you know, corporate strategic planning team." And like, you know, but I didn't want to work for such a massive company. But, you know, as part of the acquisition, like there was retention contracts and all of that. And so I decided, I'll finish out the retention contract. And then I didn't know that was 2 years long. And so I did that. I led the integration of SPSS's sales and marketing function into IBM. So I learned a lot about how this, massive acquirer acquires and integrates companies. And so that was kind of the silver lining of the whole thing, that, and obviously, all the money from the equity. But both of those things were upsides to IBM buying us. And so I left. I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And so I said, I've been working like 90 hours a week for 12 years at this point. And so I said, I'm going to move to New York, live life for a year as a stand-up comedian, which I had been doing kind of on the side while I was at IBM. I'd just been doing as a hobby. And it kind of, the way that came about was, so we got bought, and then shortly thereafter, my wife, who had kind of been my counterpart, like I was the McKinsey consultant, she was the Goldman banker, I was the Yale MBA, she was the Harvard MBA. She had asked for a divorce. And so that created like a huge open space in my calendar. Plus, IBM, people are done working at like 4:30 every day, and I'm working from home. So I like realized like, oh, normal people do things on a Tuesday night, right? And so I decided there's all this sort of turmoil happening in my life. How can I use this productively? And I'd always wanted to try stand-up comedy. And so I, went to an open mic and I tried it, and it was super fun. And I was like, oh, I got to do this again. And so while I was at IBM, I just used that time to really have fun doing stand-up comedy. And then when I decided to leave, I was like, I'm going to move to New York, live life for a year as a stand-up comic. And then I'll go back a year later to the corporate world. And then 1 year became 6. And so now I still live in New York. I'm still doing stand-up comedy. I, do, shows. I do a lot of shows for corporate events. So I just spoke at Google a couple of weeks ago, did Microsoft's holiday party. And the fun thing about these corporate events is they happen all over the world. So I get to kind of go do these quick trips to like typically 15 to 20 countries a year and have some fun making jokes about the corporate world and, supplementing it with independent consulting stuff, which I've started doing over the last couple of years.
So right here is probably a good place. Let's just take a pause and listen to a clip from one of your recent performances.
But then on the 8th day, I saw an open mic at a place called the Edge Comedy Club in Chicago. And so I was like, I'm going to go in and try this. And I took my sister with me. It was that night that I went in, and you're supposed to do about 3 minutes of comedy, right? And I took my sister with me, and she asked me, like, when we got there, she's like, so do you know what you're going to talk about up there? Did you write anything? I was like, no, I didn't really write anything. And she's like, so how are you going to do this? I was like, Serena, I spent 5 years at McKinsey & Company. If there's anything I know how to do, it's talk when I have nothing to say. All right? That's my sweet spot, baby. All right?
Okay, and we're back. Anish, that was awesome.
Thank you.
So you're going around the world doing this. That's pretty cool. And what's kind of the plan? Is the plan to sort of continue pursuing that the stand up the path that you're doing?
Yeah, I used to be this type of person that really wanted to be the CEO guy in the business world, and then if I ever went into entertainment, I thought I'd be the type of person that wants to be, the greatest comedian that, like Eddie Murphy, right? And I think what's happened over time is I learned that one of the reasons I think I'm a decent consultant is I really like variety and being able to move on to the next thing. And in order to be, the CEO or the greatest comedian of, your generation, you have to really only want to do that thing for 20, 30 years, right? And for me, I think an ideal world is if I'm, kind of flexing up and down between some business type of stuff like independent consulting or startups or, advising, young companies, that sort of thing, stand-up comedy, and maybe even add in some sort of like nonprofit work. Like if my time on average is split a third between those things, and sometimes something big happens in comedy and that takes up a huge chunk, or something big happens in terms of a business I'm working with and that takes up a huge chunk. it can ebb and flow, but my ideal scenario is I just want to, enjoy the variety of doing a bunch of different things with a bunch of different, people out there, whether that's the entertainment world, the business world, or something else.
And I can imagine that keeping a foot in consulting continues to pay dividends and give you fresh material.
Yes, absolutely. It does.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of your process for doing, for coming up with material. Do you just set aside, like an hour every day and just write, or is it very spur of the moment? Do you test stuff out in comedy clubs? I'd love to hear about kind of the process of what eventually ends up on stage when you're giving a show at the Microsoft holiday party.
Yeah, I think it's evolved over the course of the years of doing it. Now I'm coming up on 8 or 10, if you count all that college sort of jokes on stage stuff, years of doing this. And when I first started out, I everything was scripted. I would write every word I was going to say on stage, with markers for inflection and even written kind of in a more colloquial style rather than a formal writing style. Sometimes I'd have parentheses in there to cue some sort of body action or something like that, or a hand motion, or an act out. And over time that's become less and less so, where now there's not this, I have some idea and I sit down and I write for 2 hours. It's much more, I have an idea, I lay out the kind of, outline structure of that idea, and then I take it to a stage and I start playing with it and seeing what works and what doesn't, and, how can I add to it? And just, a lot of times I might do 3 or 4 small shows in New York in the night. And so, starting at 6 o'clock, I'll go test out the joke at one show, and then I'll walk, 20 minutes to another show. And during that 20 minutes, I'm, rehearsing what went well in that joke and what didn't, and how can I change it? And then I do another one, and I take a 30-minute walk to the next show. And so over the course of the night, the joke is very different at the end of the night than it was at the start, which I think this whole process feels a little bit like in consulting, where, when you're young, you build that PowerPoint deck and you want to get through it and you want to read it word for word, right? And make sure that the client really understands all this amazing work that you've done. And then you get to be a director and you have the PowerPoint deck, but really, you can talk to it because you know the outline and you're almost better improvising it than you are reading it as a script,
That's amazing. Do you keep a database of material, or is it all, hither? I'm curious about how you retain all those different ideas.
Yeah, I will say for an ex-consultant, I definitely don't have a great system. I've thought very long and in detail about I should build a database so that if I'm doing, a show for a tech company, that I can just search my database for anything that's tagged tech and all the tech jokes will come up. But in reality, the only discipline that I have is every time I write a set, or prepare a set for a show, I know all my jokes by certain keywords. So for example, I have a joke about Harvard, and the keyword is Harvard, right? And so I have that keyword in there. And so I'll write out, say a 45-minute show for, BCG, and it'll have, 50 keywords in there or something like that. And I email it to myself before the show. So invariably what ends up happening is, instead of having a database, it's just, I've done so many of these now that I just have to look in my email for okay, if I'm doing Bain instead of BCG, let me search my email for, the various BCG shows that I've done or other consulting firm shows that I've done, look at those keywords I put together for each of those and figure out which keywords I want to put together for this show that I've got coming up with Bain. Does that make sense?
That's very cool. So you see, it's kind of the keywords unlock an entire kind of anecdote story. It actually really reminds me of chunking, and what Josh Waitzkin talks about in his book about building expertise, and Anders Ericsson about how as you become more expert, you start chunking moves together, and you have larger and larger chunks. So for you, just one word, one keyword, kind of unlocks the whole joke. You don't need the princess to indicate body movement anymore. It's that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's. I've never really thought about it in terms of that sort of chunking memory technique, but yeah, that's what it is. I mean, those keywords might unlock one line, or they might, if it's a newer joke, or if I figured out how that line fits into, a broader 3-minute joke, then the keyword might unlock a full 3 to 5 minute story or something like that. And I've told that joke a million times before. I just need something to cue me to tell it.
How does the business of being a comedian work? Do you have a booking agent who books you, or do you just take the incoming calls? I imagine that there's a bit of a vetting or sales process. They don't just call you up and say, we want you to do the holiday party. Do you have to try out, or do they just watch videos? Could you talk a little bit about that side of your life?
Yeah, so there are both agents and managers who have somewhat similar, somewhat different roles. They would tell you that their roles are very, very different. I haven't totally figured out the nuances of the difference, but I think that a manager is a little bit more someone who partners with you specifically on your career, and is almost like your personal consultant, and is helping to think through things strategically and help open doors for you and all of that, and make the right intros. And, if you're developing a TV pilot, they might be, helping to work on that with you. Whereas an agent, their main job, I think, is, at least in the early stages, is to open doors for you. So, you have a clip that you think would be good for the Tonight Show, you can get your agent to send it to the Tonight Show. Whereas, you can't really do that on your own unless the Tonight Show bookers end up seeing you on a show, or you get referred by some other comedian that you work with. That said, it's interesting because all of that stuff, the sort of industry stuff with managers and agents and all of that, happens in New York and LA for the most part. So you have this weird choice that you have to make as a stand-up comic in terms of, do you want to make money, or do you want to become famous? Because the things that you have to do for those things, at least in the near term, are somewhat different. So if you want to get famous, you should probably have another job and spend all of your time doing shows for free in New York and LA, so you can develop relationships with the other comedians, so that you can get seen by all the important industry types, and cut your teeth against some of the world's best comedians who are doing the same thing. If you want to make an income, you have to leave New York and LA for long stretches of time to go and do road work, or to go and do these corporate gigs, or to do a college tour and all of that stuff. And those things will all make you a lot of money, but they don't matter in terms of, your ability to get a show with NBC. And so I think for what ends up happening is, for most comedians, they start at the age of 22 and they have 10 years that they can burn just doing the local shows and develop a reputation, all of that. For me, I started at 32. I was very much an adult, and I had a lifestyle that I really didn't want to give up. And so I had to figure out how to make an income, and this corporate and college stuff really provided that. That said, I think one of the advantages of doing the independent consulting stuff is I get to stay more in New York and LA, which means I get to go and do more local free shows they're frankly more fun and a little bit more artistic than, some of the bigger road things I do.
So it's fascinating. I had never thought that there'd be that distinction and that forced choice of be famous, which could eventually at the very tail end of it lead to lots of money, or do you take the money now? Right. So I guess there's a whole world of good comedians out there that most of us have not heard of, but they're great. They're just making money doing holiday parties.
Yeah, no, there are definitely, a bunch of corporate comedians who, make a few $100,000 a year, and they make a very nice living doing it, and they have no desire to get any fame or further in comedy because you book. The typical corporate gig might pay $10, maybe $20,000, and so if you can book 15 or 20 of those in a year, it's not a bad life.
And for you practically, how does the booking process work? Are you managing it all yourself? Do you have somebody who sort of takes the intake inquiries? Is there outbound outreach, proactive reaching for it? Like, just how does the mechanics of it work?
Yeah, so I have an assistant who helps take a lot of the sort of day-to-day work off of my plate. And then I also have agents. But agents, again, are, it's funny. Agents, it's kind of like you work for them in terms of like helping to generate enough revenue that you're worth them keeping on until you get big enough that they work for you. It's this weird thing. And so it's more like, me hoping that, through like commercial auditions and things like that, that like, I'm a kind of a good client for my agency. So all of the other bookings that I do, we just handle between me and my assistant. So typically, we will either have some sort of marketing going, or someone saw me, or there's a referral, or whatever the case may be. And we'll, get some inquiries or, reach out for some potential opportunities. And there's not a ton of vetting that happens. It's essentially, once we're engaged with somebody and they have an event, we understand what's needed. We give them a quote based on where it is, how much time I'll be doing. Is it like, do I come in and do an hour, or am I emceeing your conference for 3 days? Right. And then you send them a couple of videos to kind of show them what I do. And that's typically it.
I've seen cases where booking folks will come and see a whole series of different, for example, short versions of theater shows or various dance or whatever performances. Is there something similar where it's like a ton of booking agents will come in and see a whole series of stand-up comedians perform so they can figure out who do they want for their corporate shows?
No, not so much for the corporate shows. There is that for college shows through an organization called NACA, which is like the North American Collegiate Association, I assume. And so they have these national and regional events where motivational speakers, entertainers, comedians, et cetera, all kind of come in to compete for college booker money. But the thing is, like, if you have a good enough process in place of like marketing yourself, you can reach out to those colleges directly and not have to go through the whole NACA process, which is a little bit of a crapshoot because, you might go into NACA and, you set your price at the right amount and you have to kind of guess relative to where you are with everybody else. And then, you go in and hope that, you do well, and you might leave with 150 college bookings, or you might leave with nothing. And so to me, I've always found it better to just build relationships with the various universities and have like a show that we do every few years at each university. And then I don't have to bother with the whole NACA gamble everything on one day type of approach.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about your consulting. So I know you've done a lot of growth strategy work. There's one area that you mentioned that is I think relatively distinctive. I don't know other folks that do this, which is around this kind of claims evaluation process. Would love to hear a little bit about that. I know that you kind of did a whole number of those while you're at the firm.
Yeah, so they're called claims file reviews or closed file reviews, and it's a really interesting process. I think you have to understand the claims process pretty well and sort of the nuances of what an adjuster does and have some decent systems backing you up. But if you have experience doing that, it's a pretty interesting project that is quite valuable to insurance companies. So basically, what the idea of the project is it says claims adjusters have a process that they're supposed to be following. And when they make mistakes in that process, that often costs you money, whether that's payouts you shouldn't have made, whether that's, future liability issues, or anything else. Or just, expenses in processing a claim that you shouldn't have had because it's something that you should have just paid up front. And so you have a bunch of different stages of a claim, starting with, first notice of loss through to at the end, potentially there's litigation or something like that. And for each of those steps, your claims adjustment process has a bunch of things that you're supposed to do and ask that can send you on different paths. So if it's a very straightforward claim, it might be that first notice of loss just sends it directly to, there's nothing really for us to check out here. Let's just pay this and not waste money sending somebody out. If it's more complicated, maybe you send somebody out, they have to calculate depreciation costs, they have to do all sorts of other stuff. They have to investigate, right? And so what you do is you end up recruiting from within the company, the top 10 to 15 top 10% adjusters, like the people that they think are the best. And you bring them in, and together you build a questionnaire for the claims process for whatever product you're doing, say auto insurance. They'll build a questionnaire, and that questionnaire might have 150 questions on it. It might have, 350 questions on it. And it basically covers everything that should happen in a claims process for an auto insurer for that company. And then you take those questions, and usually there's some logic in there, right? If you answer yes to this, then you go here. If you answer no to this. So, you input that into some sort of a question, like a sort of survey management system, that takes you down the, say 300 questions or whatever you have. And then what you do is you go out and you pull, a sampling of files. You do the math to say what's statistically significant. Say, 300 files is enough to give me, 95% confidence on some of these things. And you go and you pull those files, and you have that group of top 10% claims adjusters run through those closed claims with the questionnaire that you've put together for how a perfect claim should be adjudicated. And then you start to look at the data to see patterns, and you see, 10% of the time we calculate depreciation wrong, or 2% of the time is, maybe more likely. And our incorrect depreciation calculation is costing us, $6 million a year, over the course of, $1 billion in claims. And so, if we can build a depreciation calculator, for $300,000 and it saves us $6 million, and now they don't have to leave it up to the consultant or the adjuster to figure out the depreciation manually, you've just saved $5.7 million, right? And so you go through and you figure out all of these different areas of what we call leakage, and say how much are these different leakage points worth, and what can we do to solve them? And if you can build solutions around them, you can kind of eliminate that, and it's real hard dollars that you create an impact for a client. It's pretty. I think it's good for a couple of reasons. One is it's a pretty clear-cut impact for the client. Two is it gives you quite a bit of access, right? So you learn a lot about the company from just learning about their claims adjustment process. And so you learn about different parts of the company. You meet lots of different people in the company to, potentially find opportunities to contribute in other areas.
How often do you find cases where the company is actually probably underpaying the claim? And I suppose you have to count those as you probably have to take action on those too, right?
Yeah, you do. If you find something where, it's clear they've made a mistake and they underpaid something, I mean, I think that you do have to go and make those right. But I would say for every one thing that you find where they underpaid, you find 10 things where they overpaid.
What are some of the other types of kind of mistakes? You mentioned depreciation. Some of the other kind of typical things that you'd find.
One is investigating something that didn't need investigation. So there's one of the ways that insurance companies save a lot of money is by improving their accuracy on knowing when to just pay a claim without investigating. And so there's rules in place for when that first notice of loss call comes in for what's supposed to happen there. And a lot of times if you send something down an investigation path, you'll spend tens of thousands of dollars investigating this thing. And if the adjuster reviews it and says, nope, this should have just been paid right off the bat, you'll find a lot of that where, how can we find ways to make our first notice of loss process better with less wastage? Another example is...
And are we talking mainly auto insurance claims or like fire and property damage or life insurance or what do we, or health insurance?
Yeah, it could really be anything where there's kind of a big payout, right? That's where you have a fairly standard process. I think health insurance is a little bit more complicated because you don't really have necessarily one big payout for a lot of your customers. You have, physical and, blood tests and all that sort of stuff. And so that I think is a little bit different, but things where it's people have been paying a premium for a long time and you don't pay anything. And then something happens and you have to pay a big chunk, whether that's life insurance or whether that's car insurance or, renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance. I think that those are the areas where this makes the most sense.
So the kind of the inclination could be to be conservative and let's investigate this, but you actually spend a lot of money, and sometimes it's better just to pay the claim.
Yeah, I would say it's often that way, right? I mean, the vast majority of your auto insurance claims that come in, they're not faking it, right? It's not made up, and you spend a lot of money it's like the IRS, right? You spend a lot of money trying to find the small percentage of people that are trying to cheat the system. And if you can get better at doing that, you can save a lot of money and reduce a lot of infrastructure.
I'd like to hear about any of your routines, either productivity routines of things that you've been doing a long time or adopted recently, or your creative routines of, do you kind of set aside an hour a week, or do you just jot down ideas in a notepad when they come to you? Love to hear about either one of those.
Yeah. I think that both as an independent consultant and as a public speaker or comedian, you have to be pretty self-motivated and create structures that allow you to get things done without the forcing mechanism of a boss who's giving you a deadline for something. And for me, routines have actually really helped me to create that forcing mechanism. And it's kind of, I guess, somewhat odd thing. So it's not like I say I have to write for an hour every day. It's more like when I first became a stand-up comedian, like full-time, I got to New York and, it was like I would go and start doing shows at, 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And then I'd, continue like either doing shows or hang out with comedians until, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, go grab a slice of pizza, come home, go to sleep at like 5 a.m. and like wake up the next day at 2, right? And like 2 in the afternoon. And after a couple of months of this, I was like, all right, am I really trying to become a professional stand-up comedian, or am I just saying I've worked really hard for 12 years and now I'm taking a year off, right? And if it's the former, I should probably figure out how to add more structure where I can get things done during the day that are kind of important to make the night successful. And so I set this rule for myself that no matter what time I went to bed, because comedy is a late night gig, that I had to be up by 9 o'clock in the morning. Which now I actually wake up like most days at like 6:30 or 7. But that was kind of the first rule, was I have to be up by 9, because if I did my last show at midnight and, got home at 2, I still slept for like 7 hours. And if I stayed out till super late, it better be worth it, right? It's, if I'm hanging out with Jerry Seinfeld, it's worth it, right? Otherwise go home, right? And so I kind of created this forcing mechanism where I'm up at 9. And so even if I didn't have to do the write for an hour thing because I'm just up with nothing to do, right? And so that kind of created the opportunity to write or to work on, the next college tour or whatever the case may be. And then the other thing that I did was I hired, as business started to pick up, I hired an assistant who also just shows up every day, right? And so if you have somebody show up every day, you kind of have to work, right? And do all of the things that are necessary to be successful, because this person is depending on you to A, pay them, and B, be available to work when they show up. And so that these kind of like forced habit things I've found to be quite useful in my life, where it's not like I have to fight with myself to write for an hour every day or to do expenses. It's just I have to just create the thing that forces me to be productive, and then I can choose what I'm going to be productive on, whether that's writing or something else,
I have been having this in mind here. I wrote it down because I went to Harvard. So kind of as we wrap up, I'm wondering if I could be so bold as to ask you about the Harvard story.
Oh, yeah. So I do a lot of college shows. And one of the shows I've done a few times is I've performed at Harvard. And one of the years they had this meet and greet before the show. And I didn't go to Harvard, right? I went to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, like a Big Ten type of school. And, some of the people at the meet and greet, like you could see, like, Harvard people are very proud to have gone to Harvard. And they would, kind of like a little bit of a smirk, like when I would, say where I went to undergrad, or like, a couple of people like crack some jokes or something about, McKinsey letting in lots of people these days. And so I opened the show. My favorite part of that show was I opened the show by telling them that actually I turned down Harvard to go to University of Illinois. It's not true, but I love doing it. It's like my favorite part of the show. And there's like literally generations of Harvard students that have graduated believing that I turned down Harvard to go to University of Illinois. But everyone else that I've ever performed for that's heard that story knows that I lie to Harvard students every time I go there now.
So on that, Anish, I want to thank you for at least sharing that with this Harvard alum. I won't tell any current Harvard students.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Anish, thanks so much for being on the show. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, I hope we get to work together at some point, and I think it's amazing what you've built in terms of this community and all the work that you put into supporting the consultants out there. So I really appreciate having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.